afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here. I'm grateful to know Hal Shirtliff, and he's just such a humble servant. I met him through Dave Kopez when they took the show on the road teaching about Agenda 21, and I went to many of those presentations and still feel like I have a lot to learn about that. So I actually joined John Birch Society, I think, a year and a half ago, and I'm glad to know all of you and get to know you better. So I'm someone who believes in the Constitution. It's pretty simple to me because I believe in the Bible as a standard for my life, and I believe in the Constitution, as protecting our God-given freedoms. And so I'm a member of the Westwood RTC, and we actually, had a caucus, and it was a 2014 January, and I was going to be a delegate to the state convention, and they were all talking about, their chosen candidate, and they said, oh, and there's this other candidate, Mark Fisher, but they didn't say too much about him. And they wanted to vote as a block. And I thought, I'm not giving up my vote. And of course, I didn't select that. And I went home and who is this Mark Fisher? And I Googled his name and I found this one little YouTube video. And I was like sold. Because Mark just stands for the Constitution, for conservative values, unapologetically and with integrity. And now looking back, it was probably one of his, sorry Mark, worst interviews because it was one of his first ones. But at the time it was like water in a desert. And I looked back and I actually had a comment under here and I said, let's, this guy is great, let's get him elected, let's send him money. I just put that comment in. So before I ever met him, I was sold, and I finally got to meet him at the state convention when he was patiently waiting for the count after everyone had left, and I went down and met him. But so I guess every time I saw him, I would run up and tell him how inspiring he is to me. And towards the end of his campaign, he actually asked me to be his volunteer coordinator. And I said no. And then I called him back and I said, I just want you to know, I just don't want to disappoint you. And so I was hesitant, but if you feel like you want me to do it, I'll give it my best. And he's like, yeah. So that was a lot of fun. And after that, we put together like the Republican stomp and exposed the corruption through the years in the Republican Party. I actually believe in the platform of the party, but unfortunately, there's corruption that needs to be exposed and dealt with. And so I wanted to say that I've been very inspired by Mark, and I actually wrote something up and presented, submitted it to the Profile and Courage Award. JFK Library has that. And though the way they pick the person, if you research who's been chosen, it's pretty political. But, in my heart, the award goes to Mark. And so I wanted to just read what I submitted. As a primary candidate, Mark Fisher exhibited exemplary politically courageous leadership from the moment he submitted his papers to the Massachusetts Elections Division to run as a GOP gubernatorial candidate. From that point to the day of the primary. As a political outsider and a small business owner, Mark decided to run for governor and stand unapologetically for the full GOP platform. He decided to give a voice to Massachusetts conservatives, many who had given up on being represented in a blue state. From the beginning, Mark had different representatives of the Massachusetts Republican Party approaching him, asking him to drop out of the race or to run for the state auditor instead. Before the convention, he even had a fellow conservative approach him with a name to contact in the party that he would be given $1 million in his political account if he ran as a state auditor instead. Mark never gave it a thought. By running for Massachusetts governor, anyway, I messed up here. Anyway, anyway, by running for the, I messed up on my paper, but by running for the Massachusetts governor, Mark, what his heart was, is that he wanted to inspire liberty and conservative Republicans across the state to stand up, you know, be the light and be the salt of the earth, and just run for offices, whether it's something in your town, or just don't sit back and watch what's happening, but get out there and make a difference. And unfortunately, the Republican Party establishment had already chosen their candidate, and they weren't going to, they were not going to let anyone get in the way of their win, and their efforts were outrageous and illegal as they worked to subvert pro-family Tea Party candidate Mark Fisher's campaign for governor. So So I just want to say that even with all the obstacles that his campaign had to overcome, Mark's spirit was always positive, and he gave the Massachusetts voters every opportunity to have a choice on the Republican gubernatorial primary ballot other than the establishment's chosen candidate. And he did win 26% of the vote. He persevered and did exactly what was right and with great integrity, though it was at great personal cost. Mark Fisher is definitely one of my lifetime personal inspirational heroes because of his great courage, his perseverance against great odds, his strength of character, and his principled integrity. So I'm very honored today to get to introduce you to Mark Fisher.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Hal, for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. I must admit that although I was aware of the John Birch Society, I did not know too much about it, so I thought I should do some research. And in doing so, very quickly, I found that the Southern Poverty Law Center calls the John Birch Society a hate group. So you guys are just the type of people that I want to be
Mark, they listed the 50 most dangerous people in the country on one of them. What a great credential.
I'm going to try to challenge you for that, though. So from one fellow hater to a group of others, you know, keep up the good work. Let me just get started here. With that being said, actually, I think I'm going to get a pair of glasses. This is a little bit too low here for me.
No.
People have varying ideas about the role of government. However, for Americans, we shouldn't have any confusion about it. Our founders were very clear when they declared it in our Declaration of Independence. What the signers did is absolutely amazing. It's hard to imagine that a group of men would put their lives on the line in order to break from their current form of government and form a new one. We live in an age where it's commonly said, you know, you can't fight City Hall. They fought a national superpower and won. The founders, in doing such a momentous thing, declared that the world should know the reasons behind their actions. And so they list about 36 abuses inflicted on them by their government, along with their failed attempts to remedy them, as the reasons to break the bonds that tied them with their government. We all know this. But then, in attempting to form a new government, they also state why it is that governments are instituted among men. But before doing so, they enumerate some founding, self-evident truths. The thrust of these truths are that our rights do not come from government. They come from God. it's important to remember that the founders held these truths to be self-evident. There's no arguing about them. Next, the founders state very clearly the role of government. They do not give 36 reasons, they give only one. That governments are instituted among men to ensure that its citizens are able to have and enjoy their God-given rights. Government exists to ensure God's rights to his creatures and government citizens. The motto of the country that they created is not E pluribus unum. The official motto of our country is "In God we trust." It continues to be on all our currency and on our coins. And I marvel every time that the President gives his State of the Union address. He is gathered there in the House chamber. The two individuals who are to succeed him are seated behind him, the Vice President and the Speaker of the House. All members of both houses are there, along with the Justices of the Supreme Court and the Joint Chiefs of all the different military branches. Our entire federal government is there. And then high above them all, engraved in granite, and gilded in gold, are the words, "In God we trust." This was most certainly true a while back, but I think nothing is further from the truth right now to say that in God we trust as a country. Through our leaders' actions and through absurd laws and the most unbelievable court decisions, we have become a godless nation. And it is a self-evident truth that the further and further we separate ourselves from God, the less and less we can expect his help. Let's review a little bit about what we're living in. At the last Democratic National Convention in 2012, a remarkable thing happened. The party platform had excluded all mention of God, but some high-ranking Democrats, fearing that it might be viewed in a bad light, proposed an amendment to the platform that would at least nominally introduce God and hide the fact of their atheism. However, when it was put to a vote requiring 2/3 of the majority, it clearly failed to get that majority. When it was decided that even lacking the required majority, the amendment reinstating the mention of God would be accepted, the Democrat delegates booed loudly. The role of government is to ensure that its citizens receive God-given rights. So whatever the Democrats may be doing, they are not doing government in the American sense of the word. We only have two major political parties, and one of them believes that government can be performed without God. We are all in agreement that the separation of church and state is a good thing. We don't want our government forcing a particular religion upon us or telling us how to worship. But when those on the left, whenever they mention the separation of church and state, what they actually mean is the separation of God and state. To get to this point, Democrats have to renounce our history, and they have to renounce their own political history. It was President Kennedy who reminded us in his inaugural address that our rights do not come from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. If rights came from government, they wouldn't be unalienable. The government that gave them could be the government that takes them away. And this is exactly what is happening. Government giving rights and government taking them away. Our government wants to put a man, give a man to enter a ladies' room. President Kennedy helped put a man on the moon. Obama wants to put a man in the ladies' room. Unbelievably, in New York City recognizes 31 genders. 31 genders, and if you oppose them, you could be fined up to $250,000. The government transgender rights imposition is only the latest of a long list of government or godless abuses. Let's quickly review some others. Government gave women the right to kill their babies through abortion. State governments, with the permission of the Supreme Court, has given people the right to kill themselves. Government has proclaimed itself God. and redefined marriage and proclaimed it a right for two men or two women to marry. Very soon, they will extend that right by eliminating the restriction of just two people to marry. Marriage will mean whatever a collection of men, women, or any combination of them thinks it to be. Polygamy and polyamorous marriages will be a right from whoever chooses it, and godlessness has unlimited possibilities. The move to godless government has had terrible effects. Because of the rights to abortion and euthanasia, now some, most notably Princeton University professor, bioethics professor Peter Singer, have advocated initially for the right to kill newborns up to the age of 1. But now they've modified that position. They think it's okay to kill a newborn up to the age of 2. In addition, they're advocating the right to kill people with disabilities. Government has imposed its godless ways on all of us and will continue to do so. Remember that the will of the people was summarily rejected and trodden on by the Supreme Court when California's Proposition 8, in which the majority of voters rejected homosexual marriage, was simply ignored. The government requirement that forces us to buy health insurance under Obamacare tells us that government knows what is best for us, that we cannot exercise our God-given right to pursue happiness. The government will decide what makes us happy, and if we refuse, in the case of Obamacare, we will be fined and forced to comply. Just last week, there was an editorial in the New York Times that advocated for secret courts that would be used to suspend the Second Amendment rights of U.S. citizens. Our godless government has made it socially acceptable for culture to become more and more godless. Our government-run schools, and that is what public schools are, have, like the Democratic platform, removed God from the classrooms. Instead, teachers are now being trained by police officers firing blank rounds so that the teachers can identify the location of active shooters. Small children in kindergartens and first grade are being forcibly indoctrinated to accept the most immoral actions. Pornography and lewdness have sadly become part of our way of life. Godlessness takes the most intimate marital action between a husband and wife and treats it with crudeness and irreverence and sanctions it for all those unmarried and cohabitating, and then encourages those within the bonds of marriage to violate their vows. Two quick examples of what I'm referring to. A dad and his 5-year-old son were watching a Patriots game recently. A commercial came on. The dad picked up the Sunday paper to read it, while his 5-year-old was watching the commercials. When the game resumed, Dad put down the paper, and his 5-year-old came over to him, and with all the sincerity of his 5-year-old innocence, asked his dad, "Daddy, is my heart safe enough for sex?" Second, the emergence and flourishing of a website that facilitates the committing of adultery. Ashley Madison is the website, and it boasts 46 million members. 46 million. The toll that the onslaught of godlessness is taking on the family is crushing. If the unborn child survives the lawful target of abortion, being the lawful target of abortion, it must often enough have to deal with alcohol, heroin, cocaine, or other drugs from being forced into its bloodstream. If it survives not being born an addict, it will have a very high probability of being born into a single-parent family. That one parent, most often the mom, is again usually insufficiently prepared emotionally, financially, and otherwise to adequately care for the child. The child is moved from one relative to another if it's fortunate. If it's not, it means foster care. We all know the sad story of Jeremiah Oliver, Most don't know about one of the biggest reasons that led to his demise. His dad had not seen Jeremiah for over 2 years. And that was because Jeremiah's mom had issued a restraining order against him. His dad is a heroin addict. He has fathered 6 children with 3 different women. And he admitted dealing heroin while the search for his son was progressing. Less than a year ago, a 2-year-old girl in Auburn died in foster care. The foster mom, also caring for 3 other foster children, went out to party and left the children in the care of the man she was cohabitating with. The biological mother, Jessica, could not care for the child due to her drug problem. She and the biological father showed up at a press conference not to express their regret over their inability to care for the child, but to express their anger at the foster mom, who, like them, cared more for partying than for caring for the child. The biological dad did not seem to mind that his GPS monitoring system was in view for all the public to see. Jessica's devastation ended just weeks later with the overdose that took her life. Godless government cannot solve the problems it creates. This is Herb Silverman. His T-shirt says, "I'm your friendly neighborhood atheist." Herb gave a talk 2 months ago in Worcester, and he was boasting how he had challenged the South Carolina Constitution, which holds that atheists cannot hold public office. The clarity of the South Carolina Constitution is a welcome breath of fresh air. If government's role is as our founders say it is, then atheists cannot have a role in government. They don't believe in the role of government as ensuring God's rights. It would be as though an atheist were to enter a seminary in the hopes of being an ordained minister. Let's be clear. Our belief in the triune God is a gift from God. It is a matter of faith. But the existence of God is a matter of reason. It is why our founders say that it is self-evident that all men are created. It is also why there was a time when the atheist was also the village idiot. The existence of God can be known through human reason with absolute certainty. The atheist wants to make God's existence a matter of faith so that he can claim ignorance of it. Atheism today has its champions. I want to take on one and show clearly his stupidity, his prejudice, and his gross bias. Professor Richard Dawkins said that when he dies, and if he happens to meet God, he will ask him why he didn't provide more evidence. But then, Dawkins says that even if God tried to communicate with him in the most miraculous fashion, and the example he gives is of a marble statue waving at Richard Dawkins. Dawkins would rather believe that it is an improbable result of physics rather than an example of God trying to communicate with him. On the one hand, he argues for more evidence, and on the other hand, he rejects any evidence. This is not a professor at an institute of higher learning. This is the definition of a village idiot. John Lennon no longer has to have us imagine that there's no heaven, that there's no hell below us, and above us only sky, that there's nothing to kill or die for, and that there's no religion too. There's no need to imagine it. We are living in the midst of it. Poor John thought we'd be living in peace. We are in a living hell. There's a very small book written by C.S. Lewis that sums up this situation very succinctly. It's called The Great Divorce. I encourage you to put it on your summer reading list. Lewis wrote it in response to those who were advocating that there was no difference between heaven and hell. John Lennon thought that by eliminating God, we would live as one in peace. Lewis shows that living together in hell is not peaceful. So this is our predicament, and what are we going to do about it? The next 90-second video will lead into that discussion.
Some time ago, I had a conversation with a Marxist economist from China. He was coming to the end of a Fulbright fellowship here in Boston, but I asked him if he had learned anything that was surprising or unexpected. And without any hesitation, he said, yeah. I had no idea how critical religion is to the functioning of democracy. The reason why democracy works, he said, is not because the government was designed to oversee what everybody does, but rather democracy works because most people, most of the time, voluntarily choose to obey the law. And in your past, most Americans attended a church or synagogue every week, and they were taught there by people who they respected. My friend went on to say that Americans followed these rules because they had come to believe that they weren't just accountable to society, they were accountable to God. My Chinese friend heightened a vague but nagging concern I've harbored inside that as religion loses its influence over the lives of Americans, what will happen to our democracy? Where are the institutions that are going to teach the next generation of Americans that they too need to voluntarily choose to obey the laws? Because if you take away religion, you can't hire enough police.
Isn't it ironic that a Chinese Marxist has the insight to grasp that a godless government is a failed government? I think he needs to have a talk with the Democrats. He also realized that at one time we recognized an accountability to God, and without that accountability, government fails. So godlessness pervades every aspect of our culture, what we see, what we hear, what's in our schools, on our televisions, our radios, our billboards, across the internet. The seemingly unstoppable advances it has made seemed literally impossible earlier in our lifetimes. It has been a blitzkrieg that has overwhelmed any and all opposition. But I take solace in reflecting upon a similar time in history when all seemed lost, when good men cowered in fear of the enemy, and the good God sought fit to provide an answer in the most humble and innocent of ways. The year is 1414. Christianity may be united, but Christian countries are not. France is mired in what would later be called the 100 Years' War, and it was said that 50 French soldiers would run in fear if they caught sight of 5 of the English enemy. Cowardly, wimpy, limp-wristed, effeminate men full of fear, unwilling to do battle against the enemy. It described French men then. It describes a great deal of men today. A young mother who loved her country of France did what she could only do. She prayed. And she taught her young daughter to repeat a simple prayer that went like this: "Please, God, save France." Little did that mother know that her prayer would be answered by God when he chose her little illiterate teenage daughter to lead her countrymen as their general-in-chief of the Army of France. But before Joan of Arc could take on this role, she had to prove herself. No one was willing to believe that a peasant girl of 17, who in her own words did not know A from B, could do what no one before her could do. And so now I recommend the second book on your summer reading list, and it's the book that Mark Twain called his best book. It's the biography of St. Joan of Arc. When she began her task, she went with her uncle to the local governor, and she simply said, "I am sent by God to defeat the enemy." The governor responded by telling her uncle to take her home and to slap her. After many more such insults, Joan finally convinced the governor, and all those she met, and finally the as yet to be crowned king, to allow her to do battle against the enemy. She did not have a special force, especially trained, and well-disciplined men. She used the same cowardly troops and did with them what the generals had failed to do. Twain explains it like this. He says that Joan, quote, was able to do a mighty thing which they were powerless to do. Blow the breath of life and valor into dead corpses of cowed armies and turn them into heroes. How did she do this? What she did then is exactly what I believe needs to be done now. Before Joan commanded men in battle, she commanded them to be a moral force. She would not allow loose women in the camp. She would not allow any of them to stay. She even chased one of them out of the camp herself with a naked sword. She would not allow any carousing or drunkenness. The men must live a disciplined life and not a disordered one. They would cease using foul language and stop swearing and cease taking God's name in vain. Lastly, they would confess their sins and attend divine services. Then, and only then, would they be accepted into her service. Before I speak directly about how we do something similar today, a little bit more about St. Joan. Joan called herself simply the maid, which in the language of the time meant virgin. She not only required that the men who served her behave morally, but she held herself to a higher standard. When a man mocked her virginity and swore to God that if he had her for a night, she would be no maid the next morning, Joan replied, "Oh, in God's name, you take his name in vain when you are so near your death." Within an hour, he fell into a river and drowned. Joan took her country back by returning it to a nation under God. One of her famous quotes was, "God must be first served." I'm sure we all agree with Joan with what she says. The difficulty for us is the same difficulty she had with the men of her age. She had to fight with them to get them to act. Joan fought and won the Battle of Orleans, but she had almost the toughest battle, fighting with the generals to agree with her to take Orleans. She called those at the War Council of Orleans, quote, disguised ladies' maids, unquote. Joan did not pull punches. Twain says that she was given a number of nicknames when she was very young. And although her playmates were all patriotic, they called her the Patriot. And they also called her the Bold. And herein lies the great problem of today. While we have much more knowledge than the illiterate St. Joan, we are sorely lacking in her courage. We have been made afraid by the godless. We fear the godless, calling us bigots and haters, and so we allow them to advance and to overrun our country. At the Last Supper, Christ told his apostles that there would come a time when, because of the increase of evil, the love of many would grow cold. How fittingly that describes the current time. Fear has taken the place of love. And so what do? In general, we do what we always do, the same two things. We did what Joan's mother did. We pray to God to save our country. And we pray as if it all depended on God. Secondly, and ironically, we remember what President Kennedy said, Democrat President Kennedy said, that God's work on earth must truly be our own. God wants to work through us. He has made us the light of the world's leaven and its salt. We are not waiting for God to act. God is waiting for us to act and to act boldly, remembering that perfect love casts out all fear. Specifically, what can we do? I recommend 6 things. First and foremost, number 1, we call out our godless leaders as godless, and we remind them repeatedly that they are accountable to God. Like Joan, we do not give them a pass. Let's especially call them out in this year proclaimed by Pope Francis as the year of mercy. Let's practice in all charity these 2 spiritual works of mercy. First, to instruct the ignorant, and second, to admonish sinners. Second, consider yourselves and or encourage other good men and women to run for political office and to be unashamed to have as your motive for running the return of our government to its proper role of ensuring God's rights to its citizens. Number 3, do not sacrifice your children or your grandchildren on the altar of the godless government-run schools. Those schools will quickly rob them. Those schools will quickly rob them of their faith and their reason. Find a good private or religious school, or look into the growing number of homeschooling networks and options. 4th, when we die, our spouse or a relative will go to our closet and they will select some nice clothes for our funeral and our burial. For many, our well-clothed dead bones will be brought into a church as part of a funeral service. I challenge all of you here, do not let that time be the next time you wear your Sunday best to church. Let this weekend be the beginning of a return to wearing our Sunday best to worship the Lord in holy attire. Let's have this weekend be the beginning of our change in the culture. Number 5, have your children and grandchildren, your neighbors and your friends learn about Joan of Arc and let her example inspire us to do similar things for America. Number 6, lastly, St. Augustine said, love and do as you will. Grow in your love of God through more time in prayer, and then let that love direct your actions. If we love our country, we can, like Joan of Arc, return it to a nation under God and restore government to its proper role, and we can have our great motto, "In God we trust," be more than just words, but a testament to our rebirth and our renewal. So thank you. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
Thanks very much, Mark. I was looking at a survey that was taken, and it listed the 15 most ungodly cities in the United States. And guess where Boston is? We're number 2. I made a comment that when my family moves out, we'll be number 1. The sad thing is, I cover New England and upstate New York. And guess what, folks? About 7 or 8 of the cities in my area. So you wonder why I have so much difficulty getting things done. It's because Boston, Providence, Albany, New York's number 1, according to this list. So we can let you look at it as, oh, this is terrible. What are we going to do? The world's coming. Or we have a challenge. You know, who was it? Chesty Puller, when they were surrounded by the communist Chinese soldiers, he said, "Shoot in any direction, we can't miss." Right? So that's our philosophy. I have a dear friend who's a minister. He used to live in Harlem. He lives in New Jersey now, and he was in touch with some Christians from the Sudan, and they say basically to him, "What's going on in America? You guys, have you lost your minds? You don't know male or female are anymore." And I said, I've been saying this for like 25 years. I said, we don't need to send missionaries to sub-Saharan Africa. We need their people to come here and help us get our act together. So, also we have to make a correction. This is a John Birch meeting now. That was a great little video, the Harvard professor. And what did he say? What kind of government do we have? What did he say in the video? And what kind of government are we? So you have your second job. You're going to get a hold of this gentleman and politely set him straight. I've got this is a republic, not a democracy, reprints you'd be happy to share with him. I want to thank Mark for coming here. It was a great presentation. And I want to welcome you. If you're not a member of the Birch Society, I think we may have room for you in our great organization. And with that, I want to thank you. God bless you. And until next time.
How about camp? Are you going to mention camp?
Oh, John McManus is going to be one of our instructors. That's why I wanted to mention it. Camp Constitution, it comes up July 10th to the 17th. I'm the camp director. And we hope to find people like Joan of Arc. The motto is honoring the past, teaching the present, preparing the future. And you think we have enough young people involved? No, we don't. But there's a young man that I had just met recently. He's 26 years of age. And he's telling me that, well, there's a fellow in this town, there's a prominent attorney. He said, but I don't really have, I'm not at his level. I said, oh no. I said, this guy's in his late 60s. I said, he will listen to you before he listens to me. There's nothing more encouraging to a person with gray hair, or no hair, in some cases, than a young person who believes and articulates these values. So don't think because you're young, you're somehow sold short. One of the things we do at our campus, the last full day, we go around to the local communities and pass out constitutions and other issue-related. How many young people have come to your door and given you a constitution lately? Not too many, right? Maybe never. But they're there giving petitions for Greenpeace and sign this petition for transgender bathrooms. So, yeah, so there are young people out there too, so that we have to reach out to them as well. So again, thank you, God bless you, and we'll see you down the road.